what was the language that you spoke growing up in those countries? Because you're saying French, but your English, it sounds like you're growing up in Canada or US, right? So what was the
Man,
language?
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So my first language was actually my native tongue. So it's my tribal tongue, which is Akwaso. And that was my very first, that's what I learned at home. That's my dad's language. It's my mom's language. And the second language that I actually learned was French. And I had to learn French to be able to go to school, obviously. And obviously, learning this at a very young age. When we moved to Kenya, uh, English was spoken, obviously, like outside of, I guess, my home. But the thing is, I lived in what would be considered a private community, a gated community, where everyone there also spoke French. So I barely had to speak English really when I was living there because the school that I went to obviously was just down the street. So I wasn't really going to any city centers as much as possible. Most of the time, I always had adults around me. So obviously, I never really had to speak English. But I actually learned English, well, had to obviously, better my English and really start articulating myself a lot better when I was 12, when we were getting ready to move to the United States. At the time, we actually moved from Togo because we used to go back and forth between Nairobi and Togo. But at the time, obviously, my parents told us that we were moving, so my siblings and I. So, I try to watch all the Rush Hour I can and consume all the movies and music that I can, to perfect the accent. And it took some time. But ultimately, what I tell people is you can learn languages very fast if you have no choice, right? What my parents always told us is you either learn the language or you make no friends. And when you hear that
Yeah.
as a kid, you're like, dang, okay, I guess I must learn the language, right? So by the age of 13, I already spoke four languages fluently.
Wow. That's extremely impressive. And can I ask about that? What would you say? This is moving a little off topic, maybe to what the podcast is about, but honestly, I'm extremely interested. What would you say from learning those languages, your key tips are for learning a language well and learning a language fast? Because for me, I've always been interested in learning Spanish. I at school studied some Spanish, and then in Peru, me and my friend were trying to speak it, and I was able to pick up a little, but I guess I wasn't in that same situation where I was forced to, so I was kind of like, maybe I'll learn some words, maybe I won't, but it's still something that at some point I'd really be interested in becoming more fluent at. What would you recommend?
Man, Duolingo? No, but what I would recommend, honestly, I think it's really hard to learn a new language if life doesn't force you to learn a new language, unless you're just at the age, right, where you can pick up things. I believe they say there's research that shows that if you can learn a language before the age of 15 or 16, I believe, you will speak it fluently and also sound like
Hmm.
a native person within that language, right? And I'm unsure why. Probably, probably just how the human body is, or maybe it's like muscle memory. But what I have learned and what I have picked up on is connotations and also enunciations. So it's funny if you can impersonate another language very well. Like if you can, like if somebody, for instance, speaks a different language, and if you ask them a word and they said it and then you repeated it, and you are really good with like making sure that it sounds the exact same, I think you'd be really good at learning a lot of languages. But ultimately, the best way to learn how to speak or how to converse in a different language in general is just throw yourself in there. Like you've already been traveling, right? Travel without a tour guide. Obviously go somewhere safe, but travel without a tour guide and force yourself to actually just like walk around with, a manual or dictionary or something that you can actually converse in. But ultimately for me, it was easy. Where I'm from, a lot of people speak multiple languages, right? So my parents, they speak way more than four languages. The education system that I was in, that I was fortunate to be in, you do learn other languages. Like I grew up, my sisters, they spoke German, for instance, and they learned it at school, right? So I think there's a mixture of different things, but when you live in a country like America, you don't really have to speak any other language because, like America, Canada, those are places like that are like the end all be all for a lot of the world, right? So
Mhm.
ultimately, why would you learn a different language, right? It's like, you're probably not going to need it unless you're just like a fan of languages, like romance languages, or you're a fan of history, or maybe you're pursuing a career in national security or in the United Nations or something similar. But uh, the rest of the world learns the language because it's a survival thing, right? It's either academic, professionally, or it's just, hey, you have to learn the language because there's a lot of different diversity where you live. Like in my country alone, we're a small country, but we have like 30 plus dialects, so it's like,
Wow.
how do you communicate with the village that's next door? How do you communicate with the city that's just like 2 hours north from you, right? So ultimately, obviously, everyone has like a local commerce language that everybody speaks. In Kenya, for instance, that was Swahili, right? It didn't
Mhm.
matter which tribe you were from, everybody understood Swahili. I mean, I didn't understand Swahili, but I could actually understand a couple of things, the essentials like jumbo bwana, habari gani, muzuri sana, stuff like that, right? Like these are things that you hear every day just to be respectful. Hi, hello, how are you? I'm good. Thank you, whatever it is. But ultimately, I think for the rest of the world, it's a survival thing, and sometimes life just pushes you to be a certain way, right? And ultimately, in America, it's a little bit different. So there's, which, by the way, it's a pro and con. I think it's a blessing to be American. It's a blessing to be Canadian. It's a blessing to be on this side of the world, right? I definitely think that we're fortunate, compared to the rest of the world. But nevertheless, I think there's a lot you can actually learn from the rest of the world.
Yeah,